Psychotechnologies
Psychotechnologies Live.
Live. Welcome to a super very special episode of Psychotechnologies Live. We have with us a very special guest, Naryan Wong. Naryan Wong is a co-founder of Think Better, along with Daniel Tabakman, one of our frequent hosts. He's a network weaver working on the meta crisis and a consultant with Cultivating Leadership. In this episode, we're going to be talking about how to break the number through psychotech, so like how to have more friends than just 250 people. But first, before we go anywhere, we got to ask you, Naryan, how do you make money doing psychotech, and how can I do that and everyone else listening to this do that as well? That's the thing we really want to know. We're not like wasting any time. We're just cutting straight to the point.
And I feel like I've kind of figured that out myself, but mostly it's been a lot of luck. And I'm really trying to figure out how we can do that for others in our network.
Okay, so let's start with, you said you figured it out for yourself. So let's start small, like let's start with you, sample size N1, and then like see if we can maybe like build this out to us and to the other listeners and to the other practitioners that we've had on as well.
Yeah, so I guess a bit of the backstory as well is I spent about 10 years working in a large corporation doing management style things, business management. So that's part of the resume already. And so I had that coming into it when I started to discover psychotechnologies. And then I started to practice those psychotechnologies in the office. And that was kind of like my sandbox or playground to actually, how do you help a team deal with complexity? How do you bring more grounded honesty into the workplace? Those kinds of things. Like workplaces need psychotechnologies, but oftentimes when you try and bring them in, they go, what is this? This seems too woo. That doesn't really fit the culture. And so there's a bit of a bridge that you kind of have to build.
Right. So like, how do you do that? Because like I've talked to corporate people and they're like, if I say anything like out of that like corporate line, it's like immediately shutting me down unless it's like their specific niche that they
I realized I was talking to someone I know and I was explaining, I run retreats, I have these practices, and they were like, they said something like, I run a business, I don't have time for therapy. And I was like, that's amazing. It was just such an incredible rejection of much of everything that I do. And I was like, oh, really? Oh, great. Good for you. You're having a good time. But he just was like, this person was like, no way am I coming on a retreat ever in my lifetime. Because, retreats are for other people. It was kind of the implication. And that's the business kind of mindset, at least the way I saw it.
Yeah. So how do you, so you came in with like, you're already like one of the drones or like the corporate people inside, and then you're like practice.
I don't feel like I was a drone. It's kind of like you have your own beautiful inner world and you're working in this place that kind of expects you to be a little bit drone-like. So maybe from the outside, you would appear as a drone.
Okay.
But every single person in the organization has that beautiful inner world. And it's just a question of how do you create the conditions where they say, I feel safe letting a little bit of color out into this workplace a little bit. And I'm not going to get my wrist slapped, or I'm not going to be told that's inappropriate. How do I create the conditions where all of my employees can do that kind of thing? And that's something that leaders, I think they want it, even if they don't know that they want it. They might say something like, oh, I would love to have that kind of team where we can just bring our full selves into the workplace. But I can't do it because of X, because of Y, because there's so many different reasons why they wouldn't feel like it would work. And so it's about breaking those conventions and showing people that it is possible and that it is better.
I feel like there's possibly a trick here where you're like, I was never a drone. I was secretly infiltrating, pretending to be a drone the whole way. Did you learn that through a psychotech, or did you always feel that way? Or like, how did you come to the realization that you were in fact not a drone, you were a full human being with lots of color inside, and then like just kind of fitting into the corporate environment until you probably didn't fit anymore and broached the world from a new psychotechnology lens?
Okay, I'll share something with you, but I'm not sure if it's a psychotech. It's more on the complexity systems tech.
Go.
So I kind of think of the office as having two worlds in it. There's the formal rule where you've got the formal hierarchy and the list of like, this is how business should operate. This is how it needs to operate. And this is the kind of stuff that you can write down in policy manuals. And then there's the informal world of how things actually flow, the actual friendships where there's things being communicated that aren't necessarily be like direct report to manager kind of thing. And there's the actual feelings that we have that are real and affect the actions that we take within this formal structure. But for me, a big part of it was learning to work with that informal felt sense of what is really going on here. What do people really care about? Not just what's in their job description. I can read their job description and say they're probably going to do X, Y, and Z. But when you look at how they actually act, it doesn't always line up to what their job description says. There's a lot of other things. They'll go above and beyond. They'll host a lunch for a bunch of colleagues, and the conversations there will be different than the ones that happen when you book a formal meeting. And so for me, there was something around, I can learn a lot more about the business and actually navigate much more savvy if I actually talk to people and can create that connection one-on-one or in small groups where people feel safe to share what's actually on their mind. So I'd have favorite questions like, what really frustrates you about your work right now? Is there anything I can do that would help alleviate that? Because when somebody tells you what frustrates them, they also reveal what they care about. And so I would start to spot patterns in what people cared about in the organization. And it did have to do a lot more like, I value connection. I want to enjoy the people that I work with. I want to actually make a difference. If my boss is assigning me a lot of work and I feel like it's meaningless, and I can't even tell my boss that, I'm going to have a more meaningless experience here. And so it frustrates me when, and then you can sort of complete that sentence. And the cool thing about working in it that way and like working with that real, deeper human layer rather than just the formal layers is that people actually feel intrinsically motivated to work with you in different kinds of ways. And so that taps into a deeper level of collaboration than just like, I'm working with you because my boss told me I have to work with you. Psychotech or not.
I mean, there's a like, I call it a rather simple psychotech of just the idea that there's a hidden world. And that doesn't have to apply to business. That can apply to like there's what people say and then there's what people mean. And there's a realization that we're actually living in a hidden world is a very exciting one. And then also a very terrible one because we're also living in this other one in which people are trying to hold up appearances or live in a world that looks a certain way, even though everybody knows something else is going on.
And I think a lot of people take that more real human world for granted. Like, I'm just going out on a limb here, but something like we repress it so often in certain places that we forget that it exists. And so if somebody comes in and says, hey, I have a whole bunch of psychotech that may operate on the real humans here, we're like, no, we can't do that at work.
Not a chance.
Like, this is work. It's not for humans. It's for worker drones. And then, yeah, like I'm seeing this, like, let me reflect back, see if I've got it. Like, I'm seeing like the sort of the first thing you do is like, I'm like, oh, you're a drone and all these other people are drones in the drone building. And you're like, no. They're not drones, they're people and they work in this environment. And so like you're coming in and you're like, yeah, like I gotta work and I gotta do all the, like the appearance stuff, but I'm still conscious and I'm still aware of myself, and I have my own, you said your own inner world, and you're going around and you're looking and you're seeing other people's inner world. And then past that, when you're, stretching beyond, I guess, the people immediately in front of you, and you're like, okay, how do I access their inner world? And so you're finding these like keywords, these channels, these openings of, what are you frustrated with, right? Which, in like a one very basic level, it's just, what are you frustrated with? Like, oh, okay, like very nice, like have a nice day. But you're like, no, like that's not just like a thing. That's not just like an emotion that happens sometimes that we need to, train out of our workers. Like that reveals something like deeper, something more real, something more human, some like where your interests or where they're living, like where their inside world is living and what they're trying to do. And so you're finding, I guess, these like little channels, and then what do you do with them? Like once you find these stuff, like do you just sit and eat lunch, and now your lunch is just nicer because there's more humans, or like like what comes next?
You ask people to pay you for working with them.
Yeah. You charge them like, come to my lunch, but you gotta like give me $50.
So I think a lot of my perspectives come as a leader, but also just like as a middle manager who often has these pressures from above and also pressures from below. And any middle manager anywhere has to be a bridge between these two different things. And I think there's a lot of freedom that one can find, even though you often feel super confined. So in one example, I'll have objectives that come from the boss above. I may agree with the objectives, or I may think that they might be a bit misguided because I actually know my area of the business better than my boss does. And it's not heresy to say that they pay me to know more than my boss does about my particular region. They're operating theoretically at a level of
Also, like
abstraction higher than
outsourcing
where
to
I am.
you. You're outsourced to know more than your boss does. You may be a coder and your boss is managing the coder so that the boss doesn't have to do it. Like,
so my relationship with my boss will change what my formal objectives look like. If I have a good relationship with my boss where it's clean and open communication, there's a negotiation where I get to actually provide feedback on what my objectives look like. And so they can become more relevant and more meaningful for me and more aligned to what the business goals are. But there's other layers above that. So if my boss's boss doesn't have any flexibility, or even layers above that, they don't have flexibility, maybe there's no flexibility for me to change what I formally have to do. But now, because I'm a manager as well, I've got a bunch of people working for me. I could force them to have these formal objectives, or I could say, what do you actually care about here? And is there a way in which I can work with the things that you actually care about that will contribute to the objective that I have, or whatever flexibility that I have there? So I'll have some young employees who really care about career progression, and what they're looking to do is build a portfolio of really high quality work. And I might say, oh, and you probably also want to expand your network and get a lot of visibility in the organization. I can build that into the kind of work that you're going to be working on. I may have somebody who's a mother of 4 who might say, the most important thing for me, actually, I'm really good at what I do, but I want to have a lot of time for my family when I go home, and I want to have energy there. So I don't want to have a lot of stress. Cool. That actually pairs really well with this other person that I have. And so knowing what they actually care about, they feel like they're on the same team with me, and they start to work with each other in a different way, rather than if I just said, okay, you're in charge of this portfolio, you're in charge of this portfolio, and you're in charge of this one. The amount of creativity when you're working with what's really important, it just changes things.
I got a question here. So you're spending time gathering other people's objectives, managing other people's values, and like working out how to fit it all together. Is it tiring? How do you resource yourself to juggle all this? Like, is there an internal, like, there's a lot going on that you're like fingers in many pies, or you're an octopus reaching to all the things around you. How do you stay at capacity? How do you stay sane in there while doing all of these things?
So I'm hearing somewhat of an assumption that I'm actually the one in the middle, which comes from kind of like a hierarchy where you'd picture a bunch of nodes here, all connected to one central figure who's doing that management. I actually kind of fuzz myself out and actually put everyone in the same room where they have to just talk to each other and figure it out themselves. So it's more a decentralized strategy that I would employ myself.
Okay, so it's not so tiring because you just operate them around you.
I can picture a time when we had a whole room where all 4 walls were whiteboards, and I would come in with like fresh packs of these like whiteboard markers and just everyone pick a section of wall, write down what you care about, write down what you think the business needs from you, write down how you like to operate. Let's go walk around and see what other people are writing. What is becoming clear to us? There's something just about making that system visible to itself that I generally trust people to figure things out in a way that doesn't work as well. Again, if I was centralized and had to manage everything. And especially if I was centralized, having to manage everything, and people didn't feel safe to write down what they actually cared about and would just give me a bunch of like business bullshit. Like, oh, I want to optimize profits. I want to maximize results. I want to do project management.
So that's so interesting. It's like you're kind of like going like above and beyond your job, just, and then like the result of that is that it's like actually way easier for you, because instead of you having to make every single connection and sort of pressuring people or forcing them into positions, you're just like, okay, like everyone here in the room, and I'm going to bring markers, and now you're all going to play with each other, and then things are going to work out better.
Yeah. And you know what? Let's make it a potluck as well. Everyone bring in some snacks.
Yeah.
It feels different to be a part of a workplace like that. And it gets you exactly the same thing that you need. Like, you walk out of that room having very clear objectives, measurable objectives. They just happen to find a lot more harmony than if I was the one trying to do all of it.
I'm curious, what do you do if you're in that room and you do get one of those use cases where the person's like, optimize profits? How are you going to work with that? Or how do you usually work with that? I assume you've encountered it from time to time.
And you're forced to work with them too, right?
Right, because you're in a workplace. You can't be like, that person's not in the game. They're employed by the business already.
I actually have to think of something. I don't have a pre-canned answer to that.
Good.
Because it's something that I was never very good at.
Oh. Well, I mean,
like that was when I started to feel a tension. Actually, no, because I could often figure out ways in which profitability of the business just is in harmony with doing the human thing at the same time. The tension was more felt when I thought that the profitable way, like long-term profits, was at tension with short-term profits. And so then there would be tensions in it. It's like, can you talk about that with your boss? Maybe, maybe not. If you can figure it out together. If you can't, then you'll just have to sort of sit with that tension and probably end up doing what they want. But then you lose out and the company loses out too. And I'd also love to just sort of pivot a little bit, actually, which is the same idea of a bunch of people making their cares and desires visible in the room of a corporation. I just did that same thing, and Daniel was a part of it, with the informal network that I participate in / feel a lot of care towards, which is this emerging sort of meta community in Toronto. So we've been hosting retreats for the past 2 or 3 years now, inviting community leaders from authentic relating, circling, like the Maple Willow kind of monastery space, context artists. We had an herbalist, we have rationalists, tons of EAs, these kinds of people coming together and learning together. So from that kind of activity in Toronto, there's been this building of connection of a lot of people that actually could be doing some sort of more complex strategy where we're all in relationship with each other. We can start to go after some bigger things together. And so normally what we would do is a whole bunch of people individually would think of, what do I want to do this year? 2023, beginning of the year, what do I want to do? And I'll write down my own list of goals and work on that. But how do we do that collaboratively? And we're not in a corporation together where there is a central authority who can say, hey, let me give you a bunch of formal roles or formal tasks to do that will then emerge into something more complex in service to the whole. So maybe I'll point at you, Daniel, and say, do you want to describe the collaborative strategy game that we played?
Yeah. Wow, tables have turned.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting because I was actually gonna so it's really cool. So you started off with the idea of like an engine building game. So you had a specific game that I haven't played, but the idea is like you're
or Dominion or Magic the Gathering, any deck building game where you have a bunch of cards. Each card has either an action or a resource, and you can say, I have these resources or I have these actions I want to take, and you can play them in a certain sequence that gets you from A to B, where B is winning the game.
Right. And so everybody, like, you did it really nicely. Like, you did your cards and you had like really nice, very simple instructions so that I could I actually was able to follow the instructions and put it down with no extra prompting. And everybody like made like little cards and with like the things that they're doing, and each card had a cost and each card had a generated something. And like I found that activity super in line with just like what I was trying to more or less do at the time, which is just getting my thoughts together. And you created this really nice container that just let me do it in a way that was visible to everyone else. Yeah, something you might not know about that game actually is that one of the participants joined my board and they created a resource token, which I'm using and I'm going to be using very soon. So like we did the game, but then it's like moving into real life. And so that network is already starting to like, just like the simple game Miro board is already leaving the screen and moving into real life a little bit.
So it's like, because you showed your hand, because you showed this network, here's what I care about, here's the things that I might do. Somebody else said, hey, I can work with that. Yeah.
And it's the thing I really like is that like I'm used to like pitching people all the time. So I'm like, oh, like here's the thing, and like, let me just try to convince someone to do a thing for me or with me. And the thing I really liked about the game and the board of putting my stuff down is I didn't have to pitch anyone. Like I didn't have to frame it like how they wanted. I didn't have to like, be intensely, tense 10 minutes or 45 minutes or however long. It was just like, I'm like, oh, I'm just going to do the thing I want to do. And I'm like, the only thing I'm doing is just trying to make it legible to other people. And then like magic just starts to happen. Which I think is like that magic is, I think, like that networking that you're talking about, and the complexity, like that's the kind of stuff that you really zoom in on and really try to make work.
All right, I'm inspired. Can we do the collaboration game right now with us in this room? Is that possible? Am I nuts to suggest such a move? Can Naryan lead us in a like, how do I be more collaborative, Naryan?
Yeah. And okay, so what you're challenging is really fun, because I'm thinking, because this is both live as a video, but also going to be saved as a podcast, it's reformulating a game that was heavily visual, where we could actually lay out all of these cards. And how do we shift it into something that is verbal? What's the spirit? What's the essence of that? And just to continue going a little bit meta before we actually go and try this out, what we're pointing at is something like, oh, do we actually have the generator that would allow us to be successful at this game? And I could hear you as like, I could actually receive this as a challenge. Does Naryan have a generator that could, the thing that used to generate how he would lead his team building sessions in a corporation, he's taken that same way of thinking and being able to do something in his informal decentralized networks. Could he also do it this way and take out the visual element? And I don't even want to do that. I want to do that with the three of us. Can we co-design a game right now that would allow us to do this collaborative thing?
Yeah. That's
very nice. Cool. That was very nice. I was about to be jump on and move, but like, I love that you're doing this. I love like this frame that you've just set up for us. Like I want to know like
elements.
Yeah. So for me, like, oh, sorry.
What are the core elements that would make this thing work?
Yes, that was my question. Like, what are the, like, I was gonna say, well, okay, what do we need to do first to make it work? But like now we're already in the collaboration session.
I feel like we've got like 3 people asking these questions and no one answering them.
Maybe is that the first step? Is everybody just on the same page about what questions to ask?
So part of the visibility, and I'll actually just go ahead and answer a first question, is how do we each reveal some of the things that we care about? We start to create some surface area where I get to know, well, what are your goals, or what are the things that you're looking to do? And then from there, if we each surface something like that, then we could each sort of from our side, we're the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more behind us. We can now start to latch on to the surface area that each other has shared and find some connections.
So it's like, what do you want? Like the first thing to do is like, what do you actually want? What do you actually care about?
Yeah. And maybe how do we even deepen that? Is there something that you could ask for in this space that takes advantage of the fact of that I know Daniel, I've met Elliot a couple times, so trust is going to facilitate something. Daniel and I are in the same city. Elliot's out in New Zealand?
Sydney, Australia.
Australia? Okay. So that like there's context that we already know about each other that's going to shape what we might reveal, I think.
So it's like you're like setting up this like vulnerability, like this how would you, it's something around vulnerability, like I think like you're trying to point to that and like let that out of its cage or something. Well, acknowledging maybe the context of who we are and what our connections are.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's like, for me, it's like making it more real.
I'd be happy to go first, unless one of you guys would like to.
Yeah. I was go for it.
A big thing that I'm thinking about is Emerge Toronto. So there's the Emerge gathering. I'm not even going to share context for the listeners, but the Emerge gathering, if you know what it is, you know what it is. We're probably going to be hosting something like that in Toronto. Nothing's been announced, but I'm wondering, how does this gathering achieve its utmost potential? And I know that the two of you would have something that could be really helpful there. So that's one thing that I'm caring about. What else are you guys caring about that we may be able to help with?
Totally want to jump on that and respond to it, but I'm like, oh, wait. Maybe I should not respond and work out what I care about to share. So one thing that I'm juggling in my head is that I'd like our podcast to have a bigger audience. That's a thing that I've been talking to Daniel about. We've been considering how to go about doing that, although we haven't come to any solid plans. But that's a thought that we have. We'd like to spread our conversations wider so that we can have a greater impact on people. That's something I care about doing.
Yeah, I would like audience engagement. So I would like that when we do the podcasts, there's like people like putting in questions and stuff or comments, and so it's like a little more alive and a little more like connected to the broader world.
Well, one thing we could do right now, and I'd love to do another round of things that we might ask for, but Elliot, if you share the live link to me in the chat here.
Oh,
or did you share it in Facebook?
I did. Yeah, I'll send it again.
Facebook.
Let's tweet people. Yeah,
I can tweet that right now.
So that we'll see what happens with growing more of an audience. Pretty exciting. The last Emerge that I know of was in Austin. I don't know if there was another one since then, but
no, that's the last.
I didn't get to go, but I did hear stories from that one, and I started talking to a friend of mine in Australia about making a similar event and calling it Soup. Because Emerge seemed to put a whole bunch of things in the room on the table and then not do anything with it, and like be like, here's where it all is. We haven't worked out what to do yet. Here's it, and then everyone kind of went home. And the idea of soup being that you can actually mix them around and like make food as well and give people some food and like get that participatory experience in the making of the food, making of the soup that is Emerge, although we never actually got to doing this. But that was the thought out of the last emerge that sounded really cool, that we could call it soup and we could do more soup making with people.
Mm. Yeah, like I do feel like being in this container of like my natural inclination is just jump everywhere all at once. And like still trying to but like, you know, I guess like my more conscious mind is trying to honor the container that we're in and like do it at that pacing, because it probably is better than just flailing around. That's
I'll do a
interesting.
bridging move.
Mhm.
A bridging.
I'll let you go.
Oh no, you know, yeah.
What is a bridging?
Just no intention.
Well, in conversation, as we have a lot of threads, for me, there's like, I can visualize, okay, we've got the emerge thread here. I'm also thinking about the fact that we were doing some rounds of trying to reveal what's important to us. That creates surface area for us to help each other. And I think Daniel was sensing that, oh, we've got two threads here. There's a lot of excitement. There's so many things, so many threads that we could go in. And so for me, making a bridging move is, might we actually tie both of these together, do a bit of a synthesis that like moves things forward in a particular way? And so I was thinking about what types of, I wonder what kinds of processes would enable, like that we're talking about right now, the idea of a lot of people wanting to move in a similar direction and not finding ways to actually collaborate, even after you throw a bunch of them in the same room for 3 days, that there's still desire for more soupiness to happen.
Mm.
And I mean, a lot of what I've been talking about is the decentralized approach to that. I mean, I think modern society's figured out the centralized approach, which is give someone a lot of power, have all the information funnel up to them, let them make all the connections and decisions. But what we're talking about right now is a different layer of complexity, and we're trying to work with what's real rather than necessarily through these formal hierarchies. So if you were to put all of these people together in a soup without maybe without somebody at the top trying to orchestrate things, do we think this soup would actually do the level of connection that we are looking for? And what other psychotechnologies would we want to also toss into the soup such that something may emerge from it?
Like how would we make a psychotech soup?
Maybe the psychotechs are the seasonings that brings out the flavors that are in the soup.
I don't like the people or the
vegetables. Like to think.
Where's my monosodium glutamate?
Yeah, we need a bit more MSG. Yeah, well, as you said, a desire to bring out more strength of flavor from the individuals. I suspect that what happens if you make more soup, like if you make more soupiness, you put everyone in the room together and have them mill around for longer, is that you amplify I'm just going to drop the metaphor because I'm losing myself. We need stronger individuals in the soup. We need more of it. Well, you were calling it earlier, visibility of individual caring. We need more of that in order to work with more of ourselves, which means we need everyone to be louder, which sounds also terrible because everyone could be yelling at each other. But also, maybe we need smaller parts of ourselves to be louder as well.
Like we want the flavors to pop, but we don't want them to overpower.
Right. Or get in a fight with each other.
Yeah. Or dissolve.
I suspect more soup would cause more people to like become louder, or more parts of the mix to become louder and more vivid.
So as I create an invitation to some kind of gathering that would be soup-like, there's a way in which I could say, dress code's business casual, dress to impress. And now people are like, okay, I have to show up in a certain flavor maybe. Or maybe people feel a little bit of worry. There's going to be a lot of high profile people. I need to make the right impression. I can't I can't take risks here. So they show up as more bland versions of themselves
Mm.
versus an invitation that says, we want you to be who you are. Show up as you may, like kind of thing.
I'd also
Everything is
consider
accepted.
the possibility of the invitation that says dress as a dragon. Don't come if you're not a dragon. And we're not going to tell you what type of dragon or what a dragon looks like. That's like you need to show us your dragon.
I've done one where they said bring a hat that represents your personality. You do that on the first day. Or better yet, you have a station where people can make their own hats or do some sort of activity that lets people actually express themselves. Now you're inviting each flavor to step out and like expose itself a little bit more.
Well, this is what you described as practices that like enhance certain flavors. Like allowing people to make their own hats is a creative practice, a psychotech that brings people's, well, you'll probably get people who just don't care and will make a little folded paper hat. And then you'll get people who love making hats out of newspaper, and they will make giant and amazing hats, and they'll like demonstrate how much they give a shit. But I suspect that represents energy, right? There's a whole bunch of energy behind that person's motivation to make a hat, and that is currently untapped by the collective.
And so let's also consider, because we're thinking of a space where all flavors are welcome, the person who wouldn't want to really show themselves through a hat making, how do I bring them into the room too to express their full flavor?
I also like the possibility of someone who maybe doesn't know their flavor not making a hat at all, and being inspired by what they see in the other hats, but not in this moment bringing anything because they don't feel like I have anything to bring.
And you've got the people who, even if you didn't ask that, will already come with a giant hat. And do other people take that as an invitation to show up more fully, or do other people, do they have an averse reaction? Oh, that's really cringy. I'm going to actually go more into my shell. I don't want to be cringy like that person.
I really like, there's a quote by Marianne Williamson, which is something along the lines of an invitation to shine brighter. And by hiding our light, we don't do anyone any favors, ourselves or others. And that's what this kind of sounds like. And yet also someone with a big hat may make me go, oh, someone's already got the biggest hat. I don't need to make a big hat. Like, there's something I'm dancing with here in the room with the hats. How do we make it better for everyone?
I might make one more jump here, which is bringing us back to bringing this work into the workplace. So I'm about a month and a half out from publishing my first book, which is called Human Work: 5 leadership mindsets for humanizing workplaces. And our definition of what is a more human workplace is a workplace that brings out the best in others, whatever that means to them. So it's kind of like the soup that you're talking about. If we're talking about the workplace as a soup, how, as a leader, might I create a soup where each flavor is allowed to express itself in its most fullest form? Like, I want a workplace where every individual shows up and says, I have a gift to bring to this organization. That's why I'm here. And I want to actually bring that gift alive here. And right now, what we're finding is that workplaces, people show up as blander versions of themselves. They hide so much of that real vitality behind them, and it results in a loss of energy. It results in a loss of enthusiasm, and it doesn't feel good to be a part of a system like that. And I think that's, if I go back up to the meaning crisis, like that's an element of the meaning crisis, is you lose vitality at work, and so you have less to give at home, and that creates this world that we're in. And so by writing this book on human work, where people can bring their fullest selves alive at work, I'm hoping that practice can give them more energy back in their home, in their community, in society. And that's one theory of change to address a small element of that meaning crisis. So the very things that we're talking about, like if we're holding an Emerge conference, how do we have a conference that brings the best out of every single person in that 5-day thing so that they can see each other and actually start to work with each other in ways that are really meaningful? That's the same question as what do we do in a workplace? And yes, there are leaders who have tasted that kind of thing, which is categorically different than how workplaces have been before. There's leaders who have tasted that and say, I'm willing to spend a lot of money to bring that feeling alive in my workplace here. Because if you've tasted it one place, you don't forget that taste.
Mm.
And I think a lot of the challenges in our network is that we're working on places that give people a sense of this different way of being human together, where we actually find ourselves to be most alive, and we see others like that too. And we think that there's a barrier between that experience and what can happen in a workplace. And I want to bridge that. I want to bridge that.
Mm.
I feel like going like, do you cook? Because there's a lot of delicious flavor metaphors going on here. Like if you taste that flavor in one place, you want to taste it again.
As a cook, I am mostly a flavor cook. I don't tend to follow recipes.
What do you cook?
I cook fried rice. I cook spaghetti, chili, stews. I've been really into the slow cooker. So like the whole soup metaphor that we've been working with is very much alive for me.
Interesting.
But actually, and just sharing actually that last little bit, I felt I was in a little bit of a flow sharing that piece, because I think that was the thing that was inside of me that I was like, oh, this is the thing I would like to put out into the room right now. So I might just sit back a little bit and like, I want to hear what you guys think of that thing that I just shared around bringing out the best in others and the different spaces that we can create that do that.
I mean, like I'm a small business owner, so I hate that. I hate like the whole corporate structure thing. But like the things you're talking about are the things. Like, yeah, that's the things I need. Like that's what like that's what business is. I think. It's like I really do visualize it as like it's people coming together to solve a problem in an economically viable way. And like, yeah, like I can't do everything, right? Like, so like you're talking before, like I'm working with people that can do things that I can't do. And like, that's why they're here. And ideally they're smarter than me, but that's harder to find. And yeah, like it's like that environment, like when you have, like sometimes I'm like, okay, like I know there's a thing here that needs to be done. But like I need help, like, you know, like the whole process, I'll need help. Like, what's the actual problem that like even just finding the problem is itself, you know, sometimes like you'll need a meeting or two just to like talk through to figure out what the problem is and figure out like, okay, how are we going to deal with this? Like what's the solution with resources? Like, and you know, so I'm small, so I got smaller problems. Like I'm not doing large problems, but I can imagine like corporations probably have like there's things going on that people can feel into, or they're noticing like things are not working exactly right. And like I imagine it's just so difficult to go to your boss and be like, there's a thing here, but I don't know what it is, and I need to like take up a bunch of resources to put a bunch of people in a room to find the problem. And like we're gonna like not do anything, like it's gonna be chill and relaxed, and like people are bringing in like snacks, and we're gonna hang out with markers and a whiteboard. And like trust me, when we're done with this, we'll have problems. And like to me, like selling that seems insane. Like it just seems insane to try to do that. But it seems more insane to not have that in your business. Like how would you function without that? And like, I think the meta crisis is like when I was like more younger and a little more naive, I was like, okay, like let's just solve all these problems. And then I'm like, oh wait, it's not really like this isn't exactly the problem, and this isn't exactly the problem, but it's like something more complex than that. And like I need to sort of be aligned with everybody on what we're doing, but also like I don't know what we're doing. And also like, okay, so like I'll just be in charge and everybody will follow me. And I'm like, no, that doesn't work either, because I don't know what I'm doing. So like I can't just be in charge and boss people around. I need everybody to almost like I need everybody to be in charge, and like also recognize everybody else's in chargeness, and also like not step on each other's toes, but also like go to each other's like personal space, but also not violate other people's personal space, because then you're not gonna have people working. So it winds up being there's just like a lot of paradoxes just kind of like layered on top of each other all at the same time. And so it's interesting because like you wind up like you know, Ryan, you do all these things that, you know, from like first glance, like my initial reaction, knee-jerk reaction is like, that's dumb, that doesn't do anything, like don't worry about, like, you know, but like if I'm like just like sitting there for a little bit, I'm like, oh, like yeah, the thing itself might not be doing something, but there's
Is this like making hats? Like making hats is just making hats?
you're making hats like you're a bunch of children, right? Like I would do that with a child. But like when you do these things, it's it like you wind up having this like counterfactual impact where it's like I'm doing this thing that doesn't seem very important or very big, but like just like seeing both of these roads a bunch of times and being like, oh, if I go down that path, it's going to lead nowhere and to frustration. And if I go down this path where we put on hats and do markers, then like sometimes it leads to frustration, but like often it doesn't. And often it leads to more clarity and more seriousness, more like developments with people, like more cohesion and more, you know, like a better stew. Like, oh, we're going to do this like thing that also like with cooking, sometimes it's like, oh, do this thing. I'm like, that thing doesn't make any sense. But like, if you do it, you'll have a better stew. And if you don't do it, you'll have a worse stew. And I imagine like that is what Psychotech feels like when I'm not the one running it, when someone else is running it. It just feels like annoying magic.
Because you're pointing at causality that somebody's never experienced before.
Yeah. And to me, that's like the hardest thing to sell. It's like, I'm going to sell you these magic beans. Like, that's pretty much what you're doing. You're like, they're magic beans and they're going to grow into this like huge beanstalk, and we're going to climb into the heavens and you know, achieve paradise, or, you know, lots of profits, or whatever it is that you're doing. And like there's no way, like I've done sales, like there's no way I can sell that. Like no way, like I cannot sell magic beans. Like that's crazy. But like you seem to be doing it, and like that's like amazing.
The only way that I found to work is to show somebody the magic, to give them a taste of that bean.
So you're like, so you'll like run a thing and they'll feel like, what are they feeling? So you're giving them a taste. Like, what is it? Like, I know with cooking, I'm like, oh, the flavor, and then you try to describe it. It's like very difficult to describe. But if I'm like, oh, let me just like put it in a food, and then you can taste it, and now you know what it tastes like. So like, I guess you just do that, or what? Like,
for you, imagine I was trying to pitch you to be like, hey, I'd love to come do some consulting for your small business. I would actually pick up on the term that you felt like there were paradoxes in your work. Yeah. And I might mention something like, oh, I've got this tool called polarities. Comes from Barry Johnson. And we work with the Anderon organization. And they have an art based around paradoxes that you find in business and in life. So there's leadership polarities and there's organizational polarities. And we could talk about those, and you would actually start to develop this whole language around the paradoxes that you're feeling that allows you to work with them differently. And you'd be like, oh, okay. Everyone needs to know about this, because when I leave this consulting meeting, I can't stop thinking about these polarities, and it changes. Instead of feeling them as paradoxes, because I have language for it now, I experience the world in a different way, and you start to act differently. And you start to find, oh, I used to be doing this behavior. Now I'm doing this behavior. And I don't even know why. I think it's just because I've learned the words around this. So I have a different orientation to it. But if somebody's not experiencing the paradoxes within their business, it's hard for me to just tell you, hey, you probably have a bunch of paradoxes in your business that you need to worry about. And they're like, no, I'm right. And a lot of people in the business are wrong. And I need to convince them how to do things the right way. And I'm like, but what if they were paradoxes where both of you are right and both of you are also a little bit wrong? There's a different orientation, but it's about bridge building from where that person is at. If somebody's coming to me saying, I'm right and everybody else is wrong, like I have a bunch of employees who do the wrong thing all the time, I'm going to have to start from a very different place than from a leader who already acknowledges the inherent paradoxes of business.
So I like how you did that. You demonstrated the skill that you were talking about earlier, where I said some things and like I wasn't even thinking about, like I was just like expressing my frustration. My frustration. Oh, there we go. Oh man, you're like tripping me out here. You like you said the thing and then you did it. Which I love. I love doing, but it's weird being on the other side of that. Yeah, so I'm just expressing my frustrations, and then you're like, oh, there's a human thing here, and you kind of grab the words that, like, honestly, if you had said those words before I expressed myself, I don't know that I would have recognized what you were talking about. But like, since expressing myself and now using my own language that I created on the, or used, like took on the fly, you're already like there's already meaning happening here. Like your words that were very esoteric have become very real feeling.
The abstract and powerful need to be tethered to the concrete.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in the idea of tethering powerful or abstract to, I guess you're talking real world.
Do you want to go down the rabbit hole of the model of hierarchical complexity and how we use that to bridge the abstract with the concrete?
Daniel's excited and not.
Yes, I do. You can't see it, but I have a whiteboard, a 6 feet tall whiteboard by 4 feet with the model of hierarchical complexity, and then mapping out a bunch of stuff on my wall. And that's every time I get inspired, I like start to fill it out.
Yes. This one feels almost too I don't know if I can say it, but the word abstragmatics, that comes from LSA.
What does abstragmatics mean?
Abstragmatics.
And are we allowed to talk about LSA online?
I don't know if we're allowed to talk about this, but maybe I'll switch to the complexity of language. But okay, so imagine you have a bunch of examples of colors. Let's say we've got red, blue, green, orange. You've got the concrete, which is naming the color. You can go more concrete and actually point to something and say, this is green. And so to say this is concrete. I can touch it. I can see it. To say the word green, that's one layer higher. And I'm going to use an up and down sort of spatial recognition. So the language green is up higher. And now I might go one layer of abstraction higher and say the word color. So color represents any of these colors, which represent any number of the objects, concrete objects that resemble that word. I can go up higher, like color is a word. Word is a symbol, like that kind of thing. You can keep going more and more abstract. And one way of understanding this in the model of hierarchical complexity is that any given person, animal, anything that makes sense of things can make sense of certain layers of complexity up to a certain amount of abstraction until that abstraction becomes meaningless. And so you kind of need a bunch of even I'm trying to like language this right now. Let's say that the highest level of abstraction that you can meaningfully make sense of, where it actually you see the connections all the way down to the most concrete level, that would be sort of your upper limit of complexity that you can kind of work with. And so organizations in a hierarchy, you may think of like lower level managers as being, or maybe like the frontline employee as managing a less complex task because it's an assembly, a sub-assembly of something. The manager of that is managing multiple sub-assemblies. So each of those sub-assemblies have to be meaningfully coordinated in service to a larger whole at a higher level of abstraction. And then you've got their manager who's managing theoretically a bunch of divisions that each have their sub-assemblies that are each doing their own thing. And what you find is that leaders start to max out with the amount of abstraction they can handle. So they stop being able to meaningfully organize these sub-assemblies and sub-sub-assemblies. So that's when you start to find micromanagement, because the leader up here is not capable of actually managing the abstraction. So they're actually trying to go all the way down. And that becomes too much to hold. There's literally just too much rough knowledge. If every time I said the word green, I had to think in my head of every single green object I've ever seen, that's too much for my brain to hold. That's why I create the abstraction. It's a layer of compression of a lot of information into a smaller symbol. So that's why we use symbols. And that's like the beauty of like our human thinking. So the model of hierarchical complexity describes the abstraction level of symbology that you can work with. The term abstragmatics refers to our ability to move up and down these fluidly. So sometimes I'll be in a conversation where we'll talk entirely object level. I had guys' night recently. We spent most of the night talking about the things we were actually doing. Hey, we're playing some beer pong right now. Yo, good shot. We're talking about the bar. Which bar are we going to go to? Very low level of abstraction, low level of complexity. We could go higher. We didn't.
I recently heard of the idea of, I think it was like a party where you can only talk about things you can see.
Yeah.
So, like forced lowest level of complexity.
It's a beautiful practice.
Experiment, yeah.
Yeah.
I do wonder what I would learn if I attended that party.
I've done one where you divide the room in half, and half is object level, so they're not allowed to do anything meta, and the other half is the balcony, and so they're only allowed to be on the meta level.
Right, and there's a
switch
door
back and forth.
Right. Can you talk across the gap, or you're not supposed to do that? I guess you
not
could.
really supposed to. I don't really remember actually.
It could be an interesting conversation where one person is only an object and the other person is only in meta. Like, you know,
and you have to have a
would you say that?
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can
do
it because, you know, I like talking about these things. Why would you say that? Like, that's like object and meta in a conversation with each other.
And you could even bring in somatics, which is on the meta side, put everyone on sitting on bar stools up high. And in the object level, say you can only move at right angles. You can't even go diagonal. I want you to constrict yourself to only moving in right angles and only doing the most obvious of movements. If there's a chair, you sit in it. When I did this, I talked with Aman about economics on the simple side. And it was mind-blowing how we actually were able to discuss like our present economic system using only language that a kindergartner would understand. Which is a bit different, but yeah. We then were able to go into the balcony side and be like, wow, was that a cool conversation or what? Yeah. We can only talk about the conversation, but we can't have the conversation. But so I'm going to toss this back to you guys. This idea of being able to navigate levels of complexity. It's not just about the highest level that you can meaningfully manage, which I happen to think of as something like, oh, love, beauty, connection. Those things are like super high up. But what comes online? If you thought about the psychotechnology of navigating layers of abstraction, what does that do? And I'm asking for myself. I don't know the use cases for this necessarily, only that it's been really helpful for me.
Sorry, the question again is,
what are the use cases of navigating layers of abstraction fluidly?
Yeah, I mean, I could jump in if you want. You're able to compress and decompress information very like in all the ways that you would want to. So one of the big problems with compressing information is loss. So it's like information loss. So to talk about the specific green thing, but as soon as you label it green, you've already lost like a ton of information, because there is no like real like green object. There's like you're holding like the cup and I'm pointing at my shirt and we're saying, oh, these are the same, but like they're not the same color, right? Like they're just the way we currently categorize colors. They end up within the same category. So so like if you're just holding the idea of green in your mind, then you kind of realize like there's a whole spectrum of stuff. But as soon as you jump up to color, it's like, well, now, okay, colors is like, let's say the rainbow. So there's 7 colors, right? But there's not really 7 colors. Like there's just 7 categories of colors that we've decided. And like each category itself has infinite amount of colors. And so, like, I think like this is a thing, like I tend to be a much lower level abstraction, I think a lot of times, like the way I like to operate in the world. And like us, like lower class people, we like to like make fun of managers and and bosses and things like that, because like they have no idea what's going on. And like the way like you're explaining is like, well, actually they're dealing with much higher levels of abstraction, and as I'm building the business, I'm seeing how that's true. But there's also like there's a ton of information loss there. And so if you're able to come up and down, then you're able to actually like transfer the information that's happening on the ground all the way to the top. So if you're imagining like the metaphors I like to use are like army. So like you have the soldiers on the ground and then you have the generals. And so like a good army, that information goes up and down very quickly. So but versus like a bad army, it like takes a long time to get there. And the other thing I think that goes really well with armies is when the information doesn't go all the way up, the information goes to where it needs, as high as it needs to go, and is dealt with there. And maybe there's some like residual information that passes, but like it's dealt with on the level that it needs to. So like right. So now I'm talking very abstractly into bringing it into the concrete example. The American army versus like let's say like the more Arab armies in the Middle East. The American armies, like the individuals on the ground are allowed to call in artillery. So if there's like a soldier there and he's like shooting someone, and maybe not the soldier, but his squad leader is allowed to be like, I need artillery, or I need air support, or I need airlift. And they're not calling the general, they're calling the dispatcher, or the guy that's sitting next to the artillery guy. And then later that information, after the mission, that information could get like, oh, did you actually need this? Like, did you do a good job? Like there's like maybe reports after, but in the moment, that's what's happening. The more like the Saudi Arabian army, for instance, you have to go all the way up. You have to go like much, much higher. And that takes so much longer to get through to everyone. And I think, like you mentioned before, like a big part of this is trust. So like in the NATO countries, like the American army, for instance, there's a lot of trust with each other. So each soldier everybody trusts each other like very heavily. And so, yeah, you can give some squad leader who you don't know, who is probably like low class, maybe high school dropout, or, from the other side of town in a different clan. Like, yeah, you can have the power to call in bombs from the sky, and that is not a problem. Like, we totally trust you with that. But like in the armies, like the more, like the Saudi Arabian army, they don't do that, because like well, I don't know you, like you're a different clan, you're a different person, and like now like other people are starting to have power within the army. I don't know if I trust them to not like execute a cute coup and all these other things. Yeah, I don't know if I answered the question, but that's sort of one of the ways I'm thinking about that. And so the more trust you can have within the system, and the less information loss, and also like the information just getting to where it needs to go and then dying, the better. What's the word you used?
Abstragmatics.
Abstragmatic.
You have to whisper.
The higher your abstragmatic score, I guess.
Abstragmatics.
Abstragmatics. That's interesting.
Well, and you're making metaphors again. The soup metaphor, now the army metaphor. And
well, army is an example. It's not exactly a metaphor.
Well, it functions similarly, right?
Yeah.
Like a metaphor is often something that's concrete, that especially good metaphors tend to engage your body, which is the most concrete you can get. If you can make like the balcony and the dance floor, I'm moving, I can feel it in my body. The balcony, maybe I'm sitting and I'm watching. That metaphor is powerful because it connects an abstract idea with something you can feel in your body. And so that's like, that's the use of this sort of like idea of navigating layers of abstraction. At what levels is this metaphor engaging me at? Because this metaphor is actually bridging layers of abstraction. Maybe there's some people who hear what you're talking about and only resonate with the exact example. I know what you're talking about. That example is true. It works for them. Somebody might actually draw it up another layer of abstraction. They're going to translate it and they're going to receive that metaphor at their higher level of abstraction. I'm just noticing that. I hadn't noticed that before, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a good layer that you're bringing in. Like you're bringing the somatic layer, and like the ability to abstract that. It's interesting because like a lot of meditation is like that as well. I think where you're meditating on one level in one way, and then like something else shows up, and the more you can, like the monastic academy, like Session likes to say, like you don't meditate with your mind, you meditate with your body. And like when you're getting more of that, like there's more processing power there. And it's interesting because like our own body itself is that line. You've got me talking about this, and now everything I'm going to say is going to be this. Like we have like there's the chakra system, right, which is from like all the higher to the lower, which I think is like different levels of abstraction, and like the information, like they call it the chakra, like the energy moving up and down. I guess you would call it the abstragmatic energies or something, moving up and down through there. But also like even to move out of that frame and just move into a more Western one, like we have our like frontal lobe, which is the top of our head, and that's the most abstract. And like as you go down to the base of your spine, which is your legs are the least abstract. Like they just do the things that they need to do. Like people's legs will just run. There's a ton of reflexes there. So like if you people tend to think that nervous system goes all the way to the brain and back, and that's generally true, but not always true. So a lot of your foot reflexes, like if you slip on ice, like one foot slips, the other one bends. That nervous system impulse doesn't go to your brain because it would take way too long, and you'd be on the ground by that time. That just goes to the base of the spine and back down again. And then later you kind of get like a little bit of a report of what happened. So like your foot slips, like you're already balanced, and then by the time you're balanced, you're already realizing what happened. And then like your frontal lobes are like, oh, what are we doing? And then maybe you get embarrassed or all these other things go on. And I think that's the same idea that you're pointing to, versus a corporate setting versus an army setting versus a personal setting like the body. And okay, like now I'm on a flow. I'm gonna say one more thing and then I'll let you back talk again. Like you're kind of what you're wanting to do almost is you're wanting to have like the head, like the CEO or whatever, the guy that sees the big picture, like they're like, oh, I see what's happening. That information needs to get in the body of everyone else. And so you have someone on the ground that's just packing boxes or writing something or just doing whatever is like the immediate task. How like getting their vision, if they say like, oh, I see the world and I see like this is what's needed in the world, and like that information, that feeling coming all the way through the corporate ladder, all the way down into the person doing the thing, all the way down into their body, that's the mini crisis solved, right? Or like in this local area, that's locally the mini crisis solved, where the person's no longer packing boxes, they're like solving world hunger or whatever, like whatever is thing they're doing. If the thing is corporate profits, they're probably not that interested unless they're a shareholder. And yeah, and I think that seems to be like this. Is that, would you say that's what you're somewhat what you're talking about? You're pointing to, sorry, I went.
He said he didn't know the answer. He said, what's the use?
This is not the answer. This is like, I'm just saying stuff about it. Like this is way more complex. Like I told you, like I have a 6 foot wall. Like and I'm like, oh, okay, I think I'm starting to get like a little bit of a flavor for it. not I wouldn't say I even understand this, because like understanding itself is part of it.
And what I'm hearing you doing is connecting the dots across scales, and scale would be another way of thinking about abstraction.
Mm-hmm.
And so like you're kind of doing that. Like imagine if all of the people that come onto this podcast or who are listening to us talking about psychotechnologies could say, okay, well, the very practices that are doing something in my system, like working with my parts, doing internal family systems, doing focusing that senses what's going on in my body sensations, all of these different things that you can go up one layer of abstraction and still maybe take some of the general principles. What is internal family systems with your family? Oh, that's family systems. That's already a name. Literally, IFS was named after family systems. That's a jump in scale.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what if you instead of thinking the family as a system, you could use that for your team at work? That's just moving laterally. You've still got a same group of like 4 to 5 people. You can look at microsolidarity, that's figuring out how to do teams and crews extremely well. The power of collective intelligence of a pod of 6 people can be really powerful when you get them in harmony and alignment. Now let's jump up one more layer of abstraction, the crew of crews. What does it look like to have 5 coordinating crews, each of 5 people? Can you still take some of the same principles from family systems or internal family systems? Does it operate at that level? What about the crew of crews? What is the CEO thinking? If the CEO doesn't understand how to create harmony within their own family or within a single team, they probably don't know how to do that organizationally wide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so like interesting and so like dense and expansive at the same time. Like it's because like you are totally right about like the different levels, and if you can run your family well, like if you can have a good family and you're doing that well, like okay, well now you're just doing that inside. But if you're doing that inside, you can do that outside, and if you can do that in your crew, you can do that on the crews, and if you can do that, if you can do it on the crews, then you can do it all the way down. So like the really cool thing I think about this is that you only actually need to get really good at one level, and then you already have a template for the next levels, and like everything is going to have its own idiosyncrasies, but like the general skill set kind of just like works on all the other levels. And like this
I use that as bridging pedagogy, because just because you master it at one level doesn't mean that you're good at translating between levels.
Yeah,
and that's that skill of navigating those layers.
Yeah,
which is also learnable.
Yeah, I think we've been calling it like mimetic mediation, but I think that's more maybe horizontal. Yeah, this stuff is crazy because it's so much also reminding me of like the religion I grew up in, and like there's all this stuff about like character and like doing right, like doing the right action and all that stuff, and like it's like if you and like there's this wisdom that's sort of like showing up for me as I learn more about these things, where I'm like, oh, actually, like if you are a good person, like and you do like good things, and you're like, act like a good person, like your reach can like when your reach expands, like that goodness is going to spread. And it's not like everything is connected, like everything is one, it's all but like, yeah, so like I'm still not grasping the whole, I would say. It's still a journey, which I think in a sense, like it always is a journey, and always will be, and always was.
How you feeling, Daniel?
I'm feeling it. Yeah, I'm feeling it, man. Like there's so many things happening. Like, and here's the thing, because like we're doing the body stuff, so like I'm feeling it in my body even too. And also I'm like getting self-conscious that I'm dominating the conversation and not making space for others. Yeah, that's interesting. Like as a carrot, like I'm trying to maximize my carrotness, but also like trying to not necessarily saturate the soup with the carrotness.
All right, so Daniel's the carrot.
I gotta be the carrot.
Well, he's picked his vegetable.
I wanted to be the carrot.
It could be the white carrot, the parsley.
That's racist. I already tried to change my lamp to give me some more color.
Yeah.
Didn't work.
Gotta get an orange light and then you could be the carrot.
Yeah. How are things looking from your side, Elliot?
Ooh, color change.
I figure if I'm going to be pale, I'm going to be pale with red lights.
Things are looking pretty good. Deciding whether to go for the previous question or an earlier question, or like flip it back to your work in the world.
Yeah, I have this feeling that we missed something. I feel like Naryan said something important at some point that we kind of glossed over and didn't bring to light. Oh, we promised the audience that we would talk about expanding the Dunbar number, but I think we just did. Like I think that's what we're talking about with like the crews and the crews, where you're like kind of staying within your Dunbar number capabilities, in like the physical brain sense, but you're expanding it, the numbers and the effect size, way past way past what the numbers would, like the biological numbers would make you think. Yeah,
I think, well, the interesting thing about like these Dunbar levels, which is with certain numbers of people, something meaningful seems to shift in terms of how they organize and how they operate as a system. And what we've just been talking about is the similarities that cross scales, where 5 people, elements of that resembles 20 people, resembles 150 people, and so forth. But what Dunbar's pointing at is there's some things that are actually categorically different when you cross scales at different rates. And it's, of course, it's a gradient as well. It's not a bunch of steps, but to be able to navigate these layers of abstraction, you need to also not only pay attention to what is similar, but also what is different. And one thing that I'll pull out from you, Daniel, that you mentioned, is you mentioned, I wish every person in my business could see things both at where I am from a strategic level, as well as understanding their day-to-day, like wishing that they could actually become the leaders themselves. And it's funny because in the book, Human Work, that we're writing, one of the leadership mindsets, one of the ways in which leaders are creating more human workplaces, we call it the mindset that everybody is a leader. And so it's the idea that I'm not going to treat the people below me as only capable of operating at lower levels of abstraction, where I need to organize them and I need to tell them exactly what to do every single day. Because we don't like it when our managers treat us that way. Generally, humans like the sense of autonomy and agency and being able to sort of carve our own path and pursue the things that we care about. So that very question of how do we help everyone to be the leader so that they can act as a full agent on behalf of our shared goals, that's part of the question. And I think that that has a key towards this crossing of Dunbar numbers. At which level of Dunbar numbers do we stop treating everybody as a leader and more as a subassembly in service to something larger? And I'm still thinking about that. So I wonder what you guys think.
Oh,
I mean, I also want to add the question of like, knowing that I do want to treat everyone as a leader, what do I do if I find someone who isn't living up to the leadership? They're like, they pulled some bad moves, or they had some bad ideas that didn't pay off. Like, then what? How am I supposed to, like, it's okay, like, and also we need better leadership, you can't be it today. I don't know. What if it's me? What if I just did some bad things and now I'm like, everyone's looking at me like we want to treat him as a leader, but he's acting like an idiot. Like, oh no, what if it's me?
We can shift domains again and actually look at Daniel the father.
Ooh.
You want to treat your kid, at least at certain stages, as a fully sovereign individual, yet they do have a cap on their level of agency in the world.
And that cap is always moving.
Right. And in businesses, we don't often treat people that way. We say your function is this level. I'm going to treat you as only capable of operating at this level. If you start to prove yourself, maybe I'll give you seniority at a different level. At a kid, that level's always moving. And I think the same is true in organizations where some people start to feel like, oh, I've hit a ceiling here. Why is my organization stepwise in terms of the layers of complexity that I can manage when I'm starting to ask questions that are up here at my manager's level and they keep trying to push me back down here?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, like you just described the glass ceiling. Oh. Or I guess just ceilings in general.
Positional ceiling. Like if you're the programmer, your job is to program, not to like decide the grand architecture of the program necessarily, except as you program, you might start to realize that the architecture does need to change. And because you realize the uselessness or the failings of the shape of the architecture today, you gotta like, you're seeing it.
Yeah. So how do you build those relationships? Like how does that happen?
Is this the problem on the cutting edge, or have you already got solutions for this question?
Can you say that question again? I'd love just a soundbite of that question.
How do you create a system where people's autonomy is recognized in such a way that they can naturally take on more responsibility without stepping on the toes of their managers or the other people, and be seen?
I'll give one direction of an answer, which would be the idea of the deliberately developmental organization. So in our book, we talk about learning and growth as being one particular mindset orientation, which is some leaders are attempting to create human workplaces with the idea that every single individual is constantly learning and constantly growing. Indeed, that's something that we like, and it fills us with meaning to be on this growth journey. And so if you're designing an organization or you're holding a space for an organization where everyone is learning and growing, you actually want people to be testing the edges of their complexity as much as possible. So there's this constant feedback. You're feeling, if you're a manager, you're feeling where the growth edge of each person on your team is, and you're trying to give them projects that will have them test that on the edge. So they're always going to be there. So failure is accepted in those kinds of organizations as long as we learn from what fails. We tend to use the Goldilocks principle of we don't want to give people projects that are too small and they're so easy that nobody's challenged. And we don't want to give them projects that are so big that if they failed, it would really hurt the organization. But things where we think there's probably about an 80% success rate, I think there's an 80% probability that this person will be able to step in and actually do this. And as people move up, their roles grow around them. So the job descriptions aren't just static and stuck, but they're actually growing with the individual. So they will constantly find themselves challenged. It's almost as though your position and your pay grade follows your individual growth rather than vice versa.
So it's like I'm having a hard time still grasping it. So I'm gonna I want to dance with this a little more. Would you say that's more like than you're it seems like you're working much more with people than with systems in a way. I don't know if that really is true or gets there.
Well, I think you're pointing at two layers of abstraction of the same thing. Like there's a way in which you can use the systems mindset to bring out the learning and growth of an organization. Like a principle like psychological safety could be both organization-wide, or it also could be one-on-one in your relationship with a peer. And that condition of psychological safety is one of the building blocks towards a space where people feel safe enough to learn and grow. If you don't feel safe enough to make mistakes, you're never going to test your learning edge. You're only going to stay in that safety zone. And so you just won't experience that same level of growth.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. It's almost like part of the not job requirement, but like part of like the managerial position is not just, it's like, as a manager, you have to give people the tools they need in order to do their job. And it like you're saying, actually, one of the tools people need is like 20% failure. And tasks that are the pressure, the complexity tasks that would result in 20% failure.
That metaphor is not quite doing it for me. If I was to try and use that metaphor, it would be something like, if your existing toolbox can have you successful at 100% of the things that you do, you're never going to pick up another tool.
Right.
If you find that your toolbox is giving you an 80% success rate, you're going to be thinking about what other tools do I need to pick up and find, or how do I shift how I'm using these tools in order to get that next 20%. But it's always going to be growing. So you're always looking for new tools, and that just becomes that sort of meta practice of learning all the time. And of course, if I wanted to go into the complexity, the sort of vertical development perspective, it's not just about learning more tools, which tends to be a more horizontal kind of development, but actually, well, what is my orientation towards tools? How do I actually use the whole toolbox differently in combinations? And now we're talking about different layers of complexity. I may use the same hammer at different levels, but I'm using it differently at different layers of abstraction.
I think we're still taking it all.
That metaphor doesn't fully land.
No. Okay, here's the thing. Like there's a level of abstraction where I'm like very easily getting what you're saying, and then like putting it all together on like this new level of abstraction. Like the ideas of ideas is like, it's like I don't know, it's like not coming together for me. Definitely the toolbox on different levels, like it's for sure. Like I do it with my kid all the time, right? Where we have like there's like he'll have like a toy and he uses it a certain way, and then he gets bored of that toy, does something else, and a couple months later comes back and he's using it completely differently, because he's able to understand it on a whole new level. And so like that part is landing with me like, well, but it's this how do I do, like I put in a lot of work and I'm very attentive and like paying attention to all the individual things, but I'm really like, I'm only getting the things that I understand or that I'm able to point out, and then I'm trying to get like other people to do it because they can see things that I can't see. But it's also very, like, it's a lot of work. And I'm wanting to see if there's like a way I can let the system handle more of that.
Sounds like you need a bunch of trust somewhere. I take the phrase let the system handle it as a trust problem. If you could trust the system or trust something else,
Right,
then it would just like go ahead and handle it. But if you can't, then you got to do it all yourself.
Right. So I don't try, like, I'm the primary caregiver. So like there's a certain way that I can't trust other people to be the primary caregiver.
Totally. You also can't trust the heights to not let your kid fall down heights. You actually have to stop the kid from going near the heights. Like, you can't trust the universe necessarily in certain ways.
Yeah. There's like this zone of proximal development for when he's next to me, but I'm trusting other people to do that. I'm trusting other people to like keep them safe when they're around, but I'm not trusting them to be able to do this vertical integration, because I don't think most people can. And so like I'm feeling like that burden heavily on me. And I made a chart so it could like make it a little easier. But it's still, yeah, like how do I live in that world? Like how do I not be Atlas? How do I do this without being Atlas? That's what I want to know, I guess.
What's the hardest part for you, Daniel?
It's like there's a lot of details that are shift all the time. So it's like what you would call complex. Like, so it's complicated. Like each stage is complicated, meaning like there's a lot of stuff going on that I have to pay attention to. But the system itself is very complex in the sense that like he'll like have a developmental growth spurt in like a week. And so there's things that like my relationship with him is like good and we're all like getting along and I'm finally getting what babies are like. And then like a week later, it's like, I have no idea. Like, he's like, how dare you treat me like that? Like you were treating me like a baby. Like, and I'm like, dude, you were like that a week ago. It takes like some time to catch up. I don't even know. I don't know.
To be clear, he's like pre-language, so he's not actually saying that.
Yeah,
he's saying that emotionally, and you're like relating emotionally and semantically and reading all that and juggling all that.
And I have to catch that because like he can't express himself like that either. So like I have to catch these, like I have to pay so much attention. So I guess it's just like a good parenting.
in the spirit of trying out the psychotechnologies while we're live, I'm hearing you wondering about how do you keep up to date on the zone of proximal development for your child, and how do you continually to feed them and challenge them while they're on that edge of what they can make meaning of.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge you're describing yourself appears related to your zone of proximal development, the level of challenge that you can find either easy or challenging. And so by asking you questions of like, what's the hardest part about that for you? I'm inviting you to look into your own meaning making. So maybe you can actually describe what your edge looks like. And that the step beyond that is I have a hypothesis that just hanging out at your edge and learning to describe it and language it, you don't even have to do anything with it. As long it's just the act of sitting with it and being present with that edge, that is the active ingredient. So if you'd love, I'd love to hear a little bit more. You've shared about the complexity, but I would love to know just for you, what is the challenge there? There's something you're wanting and something that you're not quite able to do.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, so I'm gonna throw out a thing, and I don't know if this is quite exactly what you want, because there are a lot of levels here, and I think this is one of those like problems where it's like I don't exactly necessarily know what the problem is, but I know that there is a problem. Like I feel like I've been doing this a lot with him, and he does do the zone of, like he does do his exploration stuff on his own a lot, like not on his own, but like he initiates it, like he's agentic in it. Like I don't let him wander around by himself, but often I am following him, and he's leading. but
I'm hearing the phrase from Daniel, there's some quality of having to work this out that feels difficult.
yeah, it's hard to work out and I have to do it a lot. Do you have any shortcuts and heuristics that I can
It just told
make it
you,
easier?
hang out on the edge. Like,
Oh, hanging on the this stuff is recursive and keeps pointing at itself. I keep losing it.
Well, so something that I do notice is we're on a podcast right now, and you're willing to actually muddle through something that you don't know.
Mhm.
That's cool. That's a certain
Thanks.
level of safety. That means that like you don't have to pretend like you have all the answers. I don't feel like there's an identity there that you're really doing a lot to project or protect.
Mhm.
I'm also hearing,
Thank you.
I could offer some things that it sounds like I imagine that you might be challenged with as you're trying to like put some words to this, which might be helpful.
Yeah.
And these are just assumptions, like, and I'm like assumptions. So correct me whether it resonates with you or not. But you really care about your son, and you want for him to develop a lot. So for you, something that's at stake is your son being a success or being smart or learning or something
like being
like that.
capable in the world. Yeah.
And what would it feel like for you to not have to be a driver of this development? Could you imagine your son not needing your support and actually finding their way and being a completely successful human being without you constantly trying to adjust their circumstances into proximal development?
Yeah, I do fantasize about that. Yeah, like it does seem like a realistic thing. It's just it feels like it's like more than a decade away.
It feels like it's more than a decade away from you being able to trust that they would be able to manage their own development without you.
Yeah. Like there's some like, okay, so like it does happen, like obviously like the way, like the things I had to do when he was younger I have to do less, and so there is like in a very strong way, like I'm just staying ahead of him. And like today he wanted to explore, so we just like took the stairs and we went around and just like I kind of just followed him around the condo, and like that's him leading. And like so there's this like there's this new aspect of like exploration. Like it seems like he woke up and realized, oh, I live here and I don't know what's going on. Like I don't know what everything looks like and I don't know where everything is, and I see these doors and I don't know where they lead. And so he's like kind of taking that on himself to explore. And that's good. And so there's been like a pace of that. And it just I don't even know what I'm asking. Like I don't even know what I want, because like I don't expect him, like he's not even 1.5 yet. Like I don't really expect him to sort of take on his whole learning development, responsibility for his own learning development, but like he really does in the ways that he's able to. I know what it is, because like I've had paradigm shifts in the past where I'm like doing something that's like really hard and like grindy, and then I get like this like insight or this like realization of what's going on, and then that shifts. I'm like, oh, like I don't have to do any of that. I just have to like do this, and then it's like, or I just have to like sometimes just like I just have to feel this way. If I just feel this way, like things will generally sort themselves out, and then like my workload kind of just drops by like 90%.
And what I'm hearing in this is that, like in the example of you noticing your son is like aware of his surroundings and now wanting to explore more because he's aware of what he doesn't know, like you're taking his perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And his how you are understanding his perspective is meaningful for you as you continue to develop your relationship with your son.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's great. Having kids is great. Because yeah, like I really like I do heavily rely on the perspective taking of others to understand, because otherwise I could just people just do random things that make no sense to me. But if I'm like, oh, like they actually have their own life and their own world that they live in, and so their decisions are relative to what their capacity is, to their goals, to their environment, it explains like so much about people.
And now you've just jumped up a layer of abstraction. You're no longer talking about the example of your relationship with your son, but now I'm seeing a general principle that would apply to how you're maybe orienting with your small business.
Yeah.
But sometimes for a lot of people, that knowing of one way of relating in one relationship doesn't translate into the other context. And that's part of the beauty of going up. And so part of the thing that may help you with your, I put in air quotes, with the edgy challenge of like relating with your son, is that there's other things that you know in other parts of your life that you may be able to bridge connections over, either through metaphor or through navigating different layers of abstraction, that can become more fluent with time, that may offer these sorts of insights. I made this connection, like relating with my son is kind of like blah, blah, blah. And it's that same kind of paradigm shift that you described. It doesn't need to be, he's always changing. My relationship is always shifting. It reminds me of blah, blah, blah.
Interesting. Like I'm feeling this, like it's like Daniel, instead of trying to build this information from scratch, maybe you have a model somewhere else that you're using that you can, import here, that gets you a large amount of the way there. Honestly, like the thing that popped in my head when you were talking is like the tarot cards. So I was doing like tarot reading for a while. I kind of took a break from that, and like I do find that really helps with like all the paradigm, like making sense making with paradigms.
That's my orientation to tarot cards as well. I don't think that they're actually true or actually going to like change my future or predict my future, but if I can actually hold in my head that it may be true and I look through it as a lens at my life, it offers me insights. It gives me connections onto challenges that I'm facing without necessarily needing to be objectively true.
Right. It like when you were talking and you were saying maybe this part of your life, that part of your life, I'm like that was I was like feeling that tarot, like we were doing almost like a tarot reading. And honestly, like this is like it is wooey, and so like whatever, but this is kind of exactly what you would expect from the situation of having the higher levels of abstraction. When you're inside the lower levels of abstraction, like that stuff does look very wooey. But then when it hits hard, or it often hits hard.
Yeah.
This is cool. I love doing this podcast. Psychotechnologies
Psychotechnologies
Live.